of the United States of America.
Ms. Perez set a new record. She got that seconding in just 32 seconds.
The chair now recognizes a distinguished member of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Ronald A. Saracen of the state of Connecticut.
Mr. Chairman, and I prefer to call you Mr. Speaker because you shall be, from the state of Connecticut, with 35 solid votes for President Ford, I rise to endorse his nomination as a man of singular competence and ability, a man who distinguished himself as a student of the law at Connecticut's Yale University, and further distinguished himself as an author and administrator of the law in his many years of public service as a member of Congress, as minority leader, as vice president, and as president. I heartily and proudly endorse our president, Gerald R. Ford.
The chair now recognizes another distinguished member of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Bill Frenzel of the state of Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman and soon to be Mr. Speaker, it was my honor to serve with President Ford during his distinguished service as a Republican leader in the House of Representatives. I watched him and I worked with him on a close personal basis. I saw firsthand his skills as a conciliator and a mediator. Those skills served our party well in the Congress, and in the past 2 years they've served the country well too, bringing us together, uniting us out of a terrible period of disunity. The gratitude of the American people for that leadership will bring an election victory to the man I now proudly second in the name of my state, President Gerald R. Ford.
The chair now recognizes the distinguished senator from the state of Massachusetts, Edward W. Brooke.
Mr. Chairman, my fellow delegates, a man of unquestionable integrity, a head and a heart, abiding faith in this great nation, and a deep commitment and sensitivity to the needs, hopes, and aspirations of all Americans, I am proud to second the nomination of Gerald R. Ford for President of the United States.
Senator Brooke, the first of these seconders to stay exactly within his 25 seconds.
The chair now recognizes the great governor of the state of, the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mills E. Godwin, Jr. Governor Godwin.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the convention, as governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia and as a successor to Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry in that great office, I arise to second the nomination of President Ford. 2 years ago, in a dark and troubled hour in this nation's history, he became the president of all of the people of this land. His stewardship in this office has brought stability and confidence, economic recovery, and a time where peace prevails and no American fights an enemy anywhere on the face of the earth. He is a living symbol. He is a living symbol for all mankind to see how our constitutional system functions after 200 years of self-government. He has richly earned the right to be chosen by the people of this great land as their leader for the next 4 years, and thus become, as American presidents always become, the great hope for free people around the world. And I second the nomination of President Ford.
The chair now recognizes the delegate from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Ethel D. Allen.
Mr. Chairman, my fellow delegates, 25 seconds will not do justice to the most human and caring president this country has known. The nation shall heed my message. These are times that require a president who seeks the help and asks the advice of all this nation's people and then acts upon it. Such a man is President Gerald Ford. Based on my personal knowledge of his concern and respect for each and every American, I am proud to second the nomination of Gerald R. Ford, the next President of the United States.
The chair now recognizes the distinguished delegate from the state of Oregon, the Honorable Victor Atiyeh.
On July 4th, 1976, we began the first year of our third century. In the first year of our first century, courageous leaders with an exciting commitment blessed this nation. That courage and commitment is here tonight. Oregon wants a democracy for our children's children in the year 2076. Oregon and the nation wants and needs Gerald Ford to be our presidential leader into a certain future. I am honored, as is Oregon, to second the nomination of Gerald R. Ford.
The chair now recognizes William Cellini of Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, as a delegate from Illinois, where the President received his earliest and strongest support, I'm proud to stand here. Threats to the peace of America, like those which happened in Korea today, are an ever-present reminder that we need a strong and we need a steady hand in the White House. Our country is not at war, and I'm convinced that this President can and will keep peace. And that's reason enough for me to second the nomination of Gerald R. Ford for President of the United States.
The chair now recognizes the delegate from the state of Ohio, Virgil E. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, my fellow delegates, on behalf of the great state of Ohio, I am proud to second the nomination of President Gerald R. Ford because he best exemplifies the principles and leadership that I can follow. He is a man of compassion, dedication, integrity, and strength. He has earned and deserves the support of this convention and the people across our great land. I urge you to join me in support of Gerald R. Ford for President.
The chair now recognizes the delegate from the state of South Carolina, Sherry Sheely Marchant.
Mr. Chairman, I am very proud that we have a man who is not really afraid to say no to the high cost of government. He is not afraid to say no to the high cost of government, and for that reason, I am very proud and enthusiastically say a big second to the President of the United States, Gerald Ford.
Well, Ms. Marching got that one off in 20 seconds for the new record.
The chair now recognizes a future member of the House of Representatives of the United States, the Honorable Thomas B. Evans, Jr. of Delaware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a year in which the American voter is being asked only to trust rather than think, to repeal the laws of economics and return to the discredited policies of the past, America is fortunate indeed to have as president the calm yet superbly strong leadership of Gerald Ford. Leadership is what the presidency is all about, and one does not become a leader merely by proclaiming the fact. Leadership is earned. It's earned through the display of the qualities that comprise it: strength of character, judgment under pressure, and the courage to stand fast when it's easier to stand loose. The United States is fortunate to have such a leader today, and the United States and this world needs President Ford for the future. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the delegate from Hawaii, Masu K. Dyer.
Mr. Chairman, the President has many times repeated a lesson he learned long ago in a Bible story. The beauty of Joseph's coat is its many colors. He believes that about the American people too. It is my great privilege and honor on behalf of the people of Hawaii to second the nomination of President Gerald R. Ford. Aloha!
There are 4 more of these seconding speeches to come now before the balloting begins for the presidential nomination.
The chair now recognizes the delegate from North Carolina, Nancy Lake.
Mr. Chairman, my fellow delegates, as an American housewife and concerned mother, I watched Gerald Ford take the oath of office in August of 1974. It was my fervent prayer that he would have the strength to restore honor and trust in the White House for my family, for my children, and for yours. He has done just that, and the people of this country will show their appreciation when the President is elected in November. I gratefully and proudly second the nomination of Gerald Ford for President of the United States.
The chair now recognizes a delegate from New Jersey, William L. Stubbs.
Mr. Chairman, as a former CIO labor representative, chairman of New Jersey Black Republican Council, it is a distinct pleasure and privilege for me to second the nomination of a man in 2 short years has harnessed the so-called runaway economy, has brought more employment to the largest number of Americans in the history of this country, and it is my distinct pleasure at this time to second the nomination of the Honorable Gerald R. Ford.
The chair now recognizes the delegate from the Sunflower State of Kansas, William Falstad.
Mr. Chairman, I am proud to second the nomination of a great man of courage who leads this nation wisely and well. Such courage is in short supply, and when we find it, we must not turn away from it. This party will not turn away. We will endorse the candidacy of this courageous man who has done so much for our country. I proudly second the nomination of President Gerald Ford.
Now just one more of those nominating or seconding speeches for President Ford before we get to the balloting.
The delegate from the state of Washington, Nada Pithud.
Mr. Chairman, I've seen several presidents come and go. I like the one we have now. He knows we need a sound Social Security system, help with big medical bills. We need an economy without inflation, the worst enemy of people with fixed incomes. I'm more than delighted to second the nomination of Gerald R. Ford for another term for President of the United States.
I remind you that in the balloting to come now, our delegate poll, which proved absolutely accurate last night on the test vote, shows that by the time up to the New York vote, Reagan will be leading, but then Ford will take over the lead at about that point, and that he will win this with 1,188 votes or thereabouts, a few maybe one way or the other. Reagan 1,069, so that Ford has 119 vote margin.
Us to call the roll of the states so that we may perform the duty for which we mainly came to this place. 2 candidates have been placed in nomination and qualify under the rules of this convention.
If this vote goes according to our delegate poll, we will not interrupt as the polling goes on. We will tell you if there are any changes from our poll. Otherwise, you can anticipate that Reagan will lead up to New York, then Ford will take the lead, and that Ford will win it by the time we get to about West Virginia or Wisconsin in the voting.
The secretary of the convention will now call the roll of states.
This is it. Big moment of any political convention, once every 4 years. Yeah. These 2 great parties, Democrats and Republicans, pick their presidential nominee this way.
Votes.
Madam Secretary, Alabama, because it wants to win in November by a mandate of its people and in the support of the free enterprise system, cast all 37 of its votes for Governor Ronald Reagan.
Alabama, 37 votes for Ronald Reagan.
Alaska, 19 votes.
Madam Secretary, the great state of Alaska, the great land, the last frontier of our Union, with a Republican governor and 2/3 of its congressional delegation, as Republicans, needs a Republican in the White House, and proudly cast 17 votes for Ford and 2 for Reagan.
Alaska, 2 votes for Reagan, 17 votes for Ford.
Arizona, 29 votes.
Madam Secretary,
Arizona, the solar energy state, proudly cast 2 votes for President Ford and enthusiastically and proudly cast 27 votes for the next President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Arizona, 27 votes for Reagan, 2 votes for Ford.
Arkansas, 27 votes.
Madam Secretary, the great state of Arkansas, reflecting the good judgment of the voters in our primary, cast 10 votes for President Ford and proudly cast 17 votes for Ronald Reagan.
So far, this is going precisely according to our CBS delegate poll, which will give Ford the nomination with 1,188 votes.
17 votes for Reagan, 10 votes for Ford.
California, 167 votes.
Madam Secretary, for the next President of the United States, for California's greatest governor, we cast the largest number of votes at this convention, all 167 for Governor Ronald Reagan.
California, 167 votes for Reagan.
Colorado, 31 votes.
Mr. Chairman, Colorado, that inspired the writing of America the Beautiful, hopes to inspire this convention by casting 26 votes for Ronald Reagan. And 5 votes for Gerald Ford.
Colorado, 26 votes for Reagan, 5 votes for Ford.
Connecticut, 35 votes.
Madam Secretary, Connecticut, the great state of Connecticut, proudly cast a solid 35 votes for the President of the United States, Gerald R. Ford.
Connecticut begins a string of 4 states that will cast the majority of their votes for President Ford.
Connecticut, 35 votes for Ford.
Delaware, 17 votes.
Madam Secretary, Delaware, the home of Senator Bill Roth, Congressman Pete DuPont, and Tommy Evans, whom you just heard, cast 2 votes for Ronald Reagan, and with a great deal of pride, 15 votes for President Gerald R. Ford.
Delaware, 2 votes for Reagan, 15 votes for Ford.
The District of Columbia, 14 votes.
Madam Secretary, last night on this floor, the Commonwealth of Kentucky proclaimed itself the home of fast race horses, beautiful women, and fine bourbon. The District of Columbia, home of fast women, their Democratic bosses, and thank God Republican presidents, cast 14 votes for President Gerald Ford.
So far, this vote is exactly according to our CBS delegate poll.
Of Columbia,
No changes at all.
14 votes for Ford.
Florida, 66 votes.
Mr. Chairman, the Sunshine State, the one southern state that cared for the president in the primary, the one that put the vote over last night, we are very happy, Mr. Chairman. Florida cast 23 votes for a great American governor, Ronald Reagan, and 43 votes for the next president of the United States, Gerald R. Ford.
Florida, 23 votes
That
for
vote was
Reagan.
dictated by the Florida
43
primary.
votes for Ford.
Georgia, 48 votes.
Madam Chairman, the state of Georgia proudly casts all of its 48 votes for Ronald Reagan.
As we said, Ronald Reagan will lead this balloting right down to the New York delegation.
Georgia, 48
Then Ford will
votes
take the lead.
for Reagan.
That's according to our CBS delegate poll, which is proving again to be exactly accurate.
Madam Chairman, America's window in the Far East and the last line of defense of the United States in the Far East cast all 4 solid votes for the President and the next President of the United States, Gerald Ford.
Guam, 4 votes for Ford.
Hawaii, 19 votes.
Madam Chairman, the great state of Hawaii, the 50th state of the Union, the paradise of the Pacific, cast 1 vote for Governor Reagan and 18 votes for President Ford.
Hawaii, 1 vote for Reagan, 18 votes for Ford.
Idaho, 21 votes.
Madam Secretary, Idaho, the gem state, which gave the largest majority in terms of percentages in the nation to Governor Ronald Reagan, proudly stands before this convention and casts 17 votes for Governor Reagan and 4 for President Ford.
Idaho, 17 votes for Reagan, 4 votes for Ford.
Illinois, 101 votes.
Illinois, the bellwether state of the nation, supporting every winning president since 1920, casts its 101 votes as follows. 1 abstention. For Governor Ronald Reagan, 14. For President Ford, 86.
In 15 states, that's the first vote that hasn't gone exactly according to our poll, and that's by 1 vote. We showed 15 votes in Illinois for Reagan. There were only 14. One of the Reagan votes
86
abstained.
votes for Ford, 1 not voting.
Indiana, 54 votes.
Madam Secretary, the Indiana report will be given by 7th District Chairman Robert Poore.
Madam Chairman, the great Hoosier state of Indiana, the home of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and a future home for the retirement this year of Senator Vance Hartke, casts 9 votes for Mr. Ford and 45 votes for Mr. Reagan.
Indiana, 45 votes for Reagan, 9 votes for Ford.
Iowa, 36 votes.
Madam Secretary, Iowa cast 17 votes for Governor Reagan, 19 votes for President Ford.
Just that 1 vote change in Illinois
votes for Reagan,
from our CBS News delegate poll, which will show that President Ford will get around 1,188 votes to win this nomination.
Madam Secretary, the sovereign state of Kansas, the most Republican state in the Union, is proud to cast 4 votes for a great Republican campaigner, Governor Reagan, and 30 votes for a great Republican president, President Ford.
Kansas, 4 votes for Reagan, 30 votes for Ford.
Kentucky, 37 votes.
Madam Secretary, in accordance with the law of the Commonwealth of Kentucky and the justice rule as adopted by this convention, Kentucky cast 19 votes for President Ford, 18 votes for Governor Reagan.
Kentucky, 18 votes for Reagan, 19 votes for Ford.
Louisiana, 41 votes.
Mr. Chairman, Louisiana's report will be given by Frank Spooner, candidate for Congress in the 5th District.
Mr. Chairman, would you please leave the microphone open? Delegate William A. Nungesser would like to poll the delegation.
Poll of the delegation has been called for in Louisiana. That means that every
Mr. Chairman,
one of Louisiana's 41 delegates will be polled by name.
Louisiana proudly cast 36 votes for Governor Ronald Reagan and 5 votes for President Ford.
There's something of a mystery as to what the internal politics in Louisiana
the attention of the
is calling for that polling of the delegation, since it has been known to CBS in our delegate count for some time that that's the way the vote would split in Louisiana. There are no surprises there.
Mr. Chairman, the delegate has withdrawn his request that the delegation be polled.
Louisiana, 36 votes for Reagan, 5 votes for Ford.
Maine, 20 votes.
Madam Secretary, the great and beautiful state of Maine casts 15 as Maine goes votes for President Gerald R. Ford and 5 votes for a great Republican, Governor Ronald Reagan.
Maine, 5 votes for Reagan, 15 votes for Ford.
Maryland, 43 votes.
Madam Secretary, according to state law and according to the wishes of the people of the state as expressed in the preferential primary, Maryland, the land of pleasant living, casts 43 votes for President Ford.
Still, our CBS News poll just one vote off that abstention in Illinois.
Votes for Ford.
Massachusetts, 43 votes.
Madam Secretary, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts cast 15 votes for Governor Reagan and 28 votes for President Ford.
Massachusetts, 15 votes for Reagan, 28 votes for Ford.
Michigan, 84 votes.
Madam Chairman, Michigan cast 29 votes for Governor Reagan, 55 votes for the President of the United States, Gerald R. Ford.
Michigan, 29 votes for Reagan, 55 votes for Ford.
Minnesota, 42 votes.
Madam Secretary, Minnesota casts 10 votes for Reagan, and Minnesota casts for our great President Gerald Ford 32 votes.
Minnesota, 10 votes for Reagan, 32 votes for Ford.
Mississippi, 30 votes.
Mississippi cast 14 votes for Reagan, 16 votes for Ford.
Would the chairman of the delegation please repeat that vote for Mississippi?
Mississippi cast 16 votes for Ford, 14 votes for Reagan.
That's the main thing, right? Okay.
Mississippi, 14 votes for Reagan, 16 votes for Ford.
Missouri, 49 votes.
Madam Chairman, Missouri cast 31 votes for Reagan, and 18 votes for Ford.
Half of the states and territories have now been called, 27 of them.
Missouri,
Our CBS News delegate pool has had only one, it's not a mistake, but one abstention from our figure, which indicates that President Ford will win with 1,188 votes.
State of Montana, land of the shining mountains, last of the big-time splendors, morally committed and honor-bound, with pride and sincerity, proudly cast all 20 votes for Governor Ronald Reagan.
Montana, 20 votes for Reagan.
Nebraska, 25 votes.
Madam Chairman, the great state of Nebraska, who provides food for millions and will provide the #1 football team next year. Cast 18 votes for Reagan, 7 for Ford.
Yeah, go ahead.
That may have
Would
split
the
the
chairman
Reagan
from
vote
Nebraska
from Nebraska,
please
Oklahoma,
repeat
and
the vote?
Texas. Nebraska is going to claim the #1
votes for
football
Reagan.
team for next year.
7 for Ford.
Nebraska, 18 votes for Reagan, 7 votes for Ford.
Nevada, 18 votes.
Madam Secretary, Nevada cast 13 votes for Governor Reagan, 5 votes for President Ford.
Nevada, 13 votes for Reagan, 5 votes for Ford.
New Hampshire, 21 votes.
Madam Secretary, New Hampshire, the Granite State, where it all began and where New Hampshire voters showed remarkable powers of prediction, proudly cast 18 votes for President Ford and 3 votes for Governor Reagan.
New Hampshire, 3 votes for Reagan, 18 votes for Ford.
New Jersey, 67 votes.
Madam Chairman, New Jersey proudly casts 63 votes for President Ford, 4 for Governor Reagan.
So our
Jersey,
CBS delegate poll is still exactly on
Reagan,
target,
63 votes
with the
for
exception of
Ford.
one abstention in Illinois.
New Mexico, 21 votes.
Madam Secretary, the land of enchantment, the state of New Mexico, proudly and morally cast their 21 votes for Governor Ronald Reagan.
New Mexico, 21 votes for Reagan.
And now with New York's vote,
New
Ford
York,
will forge into the lead here.
54 votes.
Madam Secretary, the state of New York, the great Empire State, the state that cast the largest block of votes at this convention for the President of the United States, casts 1 vote for a fine public servant, Elliot Richardson, 20 votes for an outstanding American, Ronald Reagan, and 133 votes for the greatest president and the next president of the United States, Gerald R. Ford.
The Richardson vote we had fed into our CBS delegate poll just a little bit before the balloting began. We had counted on that one.
New York, 20 votes for Reagan, 133 votes for Ford, 1 vote
The vote for
Elliot
Richardson
L.
came
Richardson.
from Ralph de Blasio. New York City was elected as uncommitted, described himself as a liberal and a public employee.
Madam Chairman, my voice is a little difficult to hear tonight, because last night your chairman, Mr. Rhodes, turned off my microphone. He did this knowing that 8 states had called for a roll call vote, which is required under Rule 15 on the minority report. This is not justice. This is tyranny. This is what turns people off on politics and politicians. North Carolina, the state that gave Ronald Reagan his first primary victory, and with 51 delegates on the floor favoring his nomination, is required by state law on the first ballot to cast 29 votes for Ronald Reagan, 25 votes for Gerald Ford.
That is a one-vote plus for Ronald Reagan in our column. There was one delegate elected in that primary in North Carolina uncommitted.
18 votes.
Madam Secretary, the Peace Garden State, North Dakota, 7 votes for Governor Reagan, 11 votes for the President of the United States, Gerald Ford.
North Dakota, 7 votes for Reagan, 11 votes for
Reagan
Ford.
will not again be in the lead, according to our CBS delegate poll. When we get to Wisconsin, probably maybe West Virginia, he will go over the top with a majority.
The state of Ohio proudly casts 6 votes for Ronald Reagan and 91 votes for the next President of the United States, Gerald Ford.
Ohio, 6 votes for Reagan, 91 votes for Ford.
Oklahoma, 36 votes.
Madam Chairman, Oklahoma, who is #1 in agriculture and #1 in energy, and Nebraska knows we're #1 in football. With great pride, casts all 36 votes for Ronald Reagan.
Oklahoma, 36 votes for Reagan.
Oregon, 30 votes.
Madam Secretary, Oregon cast 16 votes for President Ford, 14 votes for Governor Reagan.
Oregon, 14 votes for Reagan, 16 votes for Ford.
Pennsylvania, 103 votes.
Madam Chairman, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, home of the Phillies and the Pirates, cast 10 votes for Governor Reagan and 93 votes for Gerald Ford.
That was Senator Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, 10 votes for Reagan, 93 votes for Ford.
Puerto Rico, 8 votes.
Puerto Rico, the cultural bridge of understanding and goodwill between North and South America, casts 8 votes for President Ford.
Puerto Rico, 8 votes for Ford.
Rhode Island, 19 votes.
Madam Chairman, the great state of Rhode Island proudly casts all 19 votes for a great American and a great president, Gerald R. Ford.
CBS News delegate poll
Island,
running precisely according to our predictions.
South Carolina, 36 votes.
Madam Chairman, I would like to allow one of our great congressmen in America and the greatest in the state of South Carolina, Congressman Floyd Spence from the 2nd District, to announce our vote.
That's Governor James Edwards of South Carolina.
Madam Secretary, the great and sovereign state of South Carolina cast 27 votes for a great American and the next president of the United States, Governor Ronald Reagan, and 9 votes for President Ford.
South Carolina, 27 votes for Reagan, 9 votes for Ford.
South Dakota, 20 votes.
South Dakota, a land of grassroots, believes in the preservation of the land of opportunity and joins the majority of Americans who voted in favor of Ronald Reagan. Madam Secretary, South Dakota yields to the chair to cast South Dakota's votes in accordance to Rule 18A.
This is the rule that was put in by the Ford forces to be certain that each delegation selected by primary votes cast the votes according to the pledges made in that primary. This is where the phrase Trojan horse votes came from. There are 8 states in which the majority of the delegates do not favor the individual who their instructions by the vote force them to vote for.
11 Reagan. They know how to cast it.
South Dakota is pledged to vote 11 votes for Reagan, 9 for Ford.
The chairman has directed that for South Dakota, 11 votes be cast for Reagan, 9 votes for Ford.
That's right. Thank you.
This was clearly a protest by South Dakota over that Rule 18.
Tennessee, 43 votes.
Madam Secretary, the beautiful volunteer state of Tennessee cast 21 votes for the next president of the United States, President Ford, and 22 votes for Governor Reagan.
Should be clear that the South Dakota demonstration there means nothing.
Tennessee,
the votes were cast as CBS News, a delegate poll,
Reagan,
said they would be, and as indeed the law dictated they should be.
Texas, 100 votes.
These votes are all going to go for Governor Reagan. It's determined by the Texas primary, which swept
Madam
the state.
Secretary, the delegates from the humble state of Texas, a state that saw an increase of over 300,000 voters in our Republican primary directly as a result of the Ronald Reagan candidacy, and in keeping with our heritage, would like to cast 200 votes for Ronald Reagan, but will settle with 100.
But how much did Reagan spend? How much did Reagan spend?
Texas, 100 votes for Reagan.
Utah, 20 votes.
Madam Secretary, Utah passes on the commercial for fear you'll all want to move there, and proudly casts 20 votes for the great American of our generation, the former governor of California, Ronald Reagan.
That's the chairman of the delegation, Mr. Bischoff, who got in that little imbroglio and snatched the telephone out of its socket in the New York delegation last night.
For Reagan.
Vermont, 18 votes.
Madam Chairman, the Green Mountain state of Vermont, which celebrates its bicentennial year in 1977, proudly casts all of its 18 votes for President Gerald R. Ford.
Vermont, 18 votes for Ford.
Virginia, 51 votes.
Virginia, the Old Dominion state, cast 35 votes for Reagan, 16 votes for President Ford.
Governor Miles
Secretary,
Godwin.
Madam Secretary,
That's the way it was planned.
my name is Herbert N. Morgan.
Sounds like a poll of the
I'm a
delegation.
delegate from the 10th District of Virginia. I respectfully request that the delegation be polled.
Well, if he doesn't withdraw that, as happened earlier in the previous delegation, Virginia's 51 delegates will be called by name. And at this late stage in this poll, we will have to delay the proceedings.
The delegate from Virginia, Herbert N. Morgan, demands that the Virginia delegation be polled. The Secretary will poll the delegation.
The polling of delegations, as we said last night, is frequently dictated by internal politics in the state. Some delegate who the person who requests the poll wants to show up for his vote in his home area. However, why that should be in Virginia, where we had found where our CBS delegate poll had Virginia with 34 for Reagan, 16 for Ford all along.
George H. McMath.
McMath votes for Reagan.
CBS News coverage of the Republican National Convention will continue in a moment.
McMath votes for Reagan. William L. Scott.
Which billboard? Gotcha.
CBS News continues its special report, Campaign 76. Tonight, the fourth session of the Republican National Convention from the Kemper Arena in Kansas City. This portion sponsored by Western Union, now serving America with communication satellites. And here again is Walter Cronkite.
Why Herbert Morgan of Arlington, which is, as you know, a suburb of Washington, D.C., chose to ask for the Virginia delegation to be polled, we still haven't determined. We would like to know because our CBS delegate poll has shown that delegation pretty solid for quite a long time in the manner that the vote was cast tonight. No shifting in that delegation as far as we know, but we will find out if we can why Mr. Morgan wanted a poll of the delegation. He is a Reagan delegate, as we said. Meanwhile, the Virginia poll goes on, and we're just a state or two away from enough votes for President Ford to claim this nomination. He's just 26 votes away, and the way it looks from here, in Virginia now, those votes, 34 for Reagan and 16 for Ford. Then the Virgin Islands, 4 votes, which don't add up to very much. Washington states come in with 31 votes for Reagan. That won't do it for President Ford. But then 20 votes for West Virginia, and that may very well put him over the top at that point. If it's not in West Virginia, it'll be in the next state, certainly, with Wisconsin, 45 votes. I haven't actually added up those totals at this particular juncture. Ford now has 1,104. Let's see how that counts. He gets 4 more in the Virgin Islands. That's 1,108. 7 in Washington. That's 1,115. And 20 in West Virginia. That does it. That would put him over the top.
Votes for Reagan.
So apparently West Virginia's vote is going to do it tonight.
Herman King cast his vote for the greatest campaigner in America, Ronald Reagan.
King votes for Reagan. B.H. Elliott, Jr.
B.H. Elliott, Jr., the delegate from Northampton County, proudly votes for Ronald Reagan.
Elliott votes for Reagan. A. Joseph Canada, Jr.
Canada from Virginia Beach, the world's largest resort city, proudly cast his vote for Ronald
votes
Reagan.
are not in alphabetical order, so I can't tell you at the moment how far we have proceeded along the count of all of those 51 Virginia delegates that Mr. Morgan wanted to have polled. However, Mike Wallace has reached the Virginia delegation and now can tell us why perhaps this poll is being taken. Mike?
Walter, I'm not going to tell you why. I'm going to let Herb Morgan tell you why. Why have you asked for a poll of the delegation, Mr. Morgan?
Mike, this was purely my idea. No one else had anything to do with it, but I know that I helped elect some of the people to this convention as delegates based on the fact that they represented to the members of the convention that they were supporting Ronald Reagan. Subsequent to that time, after representing that to the people, they have changed their votes to President Ford. I would like for the Republicans in Virginia to see how each one of them had voted individually. That's the sole purpose of it.
I see. Now, there was one uncommitted delegate, the only uncommitted delegate in the entire convention, 80-year-old Eliza Sprinkle. What did she finally vote?
She voted for Governor Reagan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morgan. That's it, Walter.
I guess that's the explanation.
Roy votes for Reagan. Sterling Reeves,
The
Jr.
vote, I think maybe I announced it wrong for Virginia. It was 35 votes for Reagan, not 34, as I believe I said. This was called to my attention. Doesn't really make that much difference. Ronald Reagan, the governor of California, isn't going to make it tonight on this vote. It's quite clear.
Jim Helms joins cousin Jesse in enthusiastically casting a vote for Ronald Reagan.
Helm votes for Reagan. Judy Peachy.
Governor Reagan.
Peachy votes for Reagan. Ray L. Garland.
President Ford.
Garland votes for Ford. Lois Kent.
Lois Kent casts her vote for a man who has earned our loyalty and support, President Gerald Ford.
Kent votes for Ford. Flo Trawick.
Flo Trawick from Lynchburg, City of the Seven Hills, votes for President Ford.
Trawick votes for Ford. Alfred B. Kramer III.
Kramer votes for Reagan.
Kramer votes for Reagan. Grant Rush. Grant Rush.
Grant Rush from Rockingham County proudly votes for Governor Reagan.
Rush votes for Reagan.
As we were reporting last night here, you know, the Democratic Convention back in 1952, the first convention nationally televised, was polling delegations on the floor, as the Republicans are doing here tonight. And it became a sort of a popular game, it seemed at the time, just to get, it was said by some detractors, people's faces and names on television. And indeed, there may have been one or two cases of that. But some political observers, including this one, went through I forget how many there were, 17 or 18 polls of delegations and 2 or 3 roll calls, and found that there was a pretty good political excuse for the roll call in all but 2 or 3 of those cases. Now, Mr. Morgan has his reason, as he told Mike Wallace a moment ago. He wants to flesh out a couple of delegates who he said had told their hometown folks they were for Reagan and are now voting for Ford. That's a legitimate political exercise.
Delegate Crockett.
James Crockett casts his vote for President Ford.
Crockett votes for Ford. Teddy Bailey.
Teddy Bailey proudly cast his vote for the president and the next president of the United States, Gerald R. Ford.
Bailey votes for Ford. Naomi D. Zeben.
Naomi Zevin proudly casts her vote for Ronald Reagan for those back home.
Zevin votes for Reagan. Herbert N. Morgan.
Morgan votes for Reagan.
Morgan votes for Reagan. Cassandra Riley.
Sandy Riley from Loudoun County, last but not least from Virginia, votes for the next President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Riley votes for Reagan.
That Virginia poll almost complete now. There have been no changes from what our CBS delegate poll indicated would be of the individual votes in Virginia. That will now be...